She woke up earlier than usual that morning. The sky outside her penthouse window was still a muted gray, the kind that blurs the lines between night and day. It had been 5 years since she lost her only son, and still, the pain sat in her chest like cold iron. A billionaire with properties, investments, foundations, and a name that commanded boardrooms across the country, yet when this day came around, she became small again, just a mother mourning her child. She didn't allow anyone to come with her. Her driver knew the drill. Drop her at the cemetery gate, wait by the road, and don't speak unless spoken to. No assistant, no bodyguard, no entourage. Just her memories, and the grave that marked the final resting place of a boy she had once held in her arms. Every year, she dressed the same for this occasion: black wool coat, leather gloves, minimal makeup, and her late son's watch on her wrist. It was too big for her and didn't quite match the rest of her refined outfit, but it stayed on her like armor. Something about the ticking made her feel he was still around, as if time didn't stop for him, even though her world had. She arrived at the cemetery gates just as the sun began to bleed light through the clouds. The guards recognized her immediately and gave her a respectful nod, opening the wrought iron gates without a word. She walked alone, heels muffled by the gravel path, clutching a bouquet of white lilies, his favorite. She didn't believe in God the way she used to, not since the accident, but she still came every year and talked to her son as if he could hear her. As she passed rows of stones, each one holding someone's whole world beneath it, she thought about how many times she'd walked this path. She had memorized the exact number of steps it took to reach his grave from the main gate, 116. She counted them, one by one, like a ritual that gave her some small sense of control in a world that had taken too much from her. When she reached the familiar gray stone, she paused, drawing in a deep breath. The chiseled name still looked too fresh, too real. She knelt slowly, placing the lilies down with a kind of reverence reserved only for the dead. Her fingers brushed over his name, as they always did, and the sharp chill of the marble bit into her skin. She began to speak softly, the way she always did, sharing the year's events, what had changed at the company, how the world felt emptier without him. Then, as she looked down at the base of the headstone, something shifted. There were already flowers there, fresh ones. Not the kind the cemetery staff left. These were personal, wildflowers, messy but intentional, wrapped in a strip of blue fabric. It wasn't hers. Someone else had been here. Her brow furrowed. She was meticulous about these visits, always the first to arrive. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the wildflowers, examining the small card tucked between the stems. It wasn't signed. Just a child's drawing crayon scribbles of a man, a woman, and a little boy, holding hands beneath a yellow sun. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar rising in her throat. Not grief, not sorrow, something else. Confusion, dread, a flicker of suspicion. She stood slowly, her eyes scanning the quiet cemetery. The place was usually empty this early, but as her gaze moved across the rows of stones, she saw something unexpected just a few yards away. A woman, young, black, dressed in a faded waitress uniform, was kneeling by a nearby grave, crying quietly. Beside her, a small boy clutched a teddy bear and looked straight at her with eyes that felt too familiar. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to approach or retreat. The sight before her didn't make sense. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, dressed in a plain diner uniform, blue shirt, name tag, apron still dusted with flour, was weeping quietly beside her son's grave. Her shoulders trembled, and she pressed a tissue to her face, trying to muffle the sounds. A little boy, no more than 5 years old, stood next to her. He was hugging a worn-out teddy bear, one arm wrapped tightly around it while his other hand clutched the hem of the woman's apron. They didn't belong there. At least not in the way she thought people belonged at a grave like this one. Her son had been from a world of privilege, raised in luxury, educated abroad, groomed to take over the family empire. The people who visited his grave were usually close friends, dignitaries, or business associates who left behind tasteful bouquets and pressed condolence notes. But this woman was clearly a waitress, and the child looked like he'd come straight from a daycare. She took a few steps forward, trying to stay composed. The woman hadn't seen her yet, too lost in her grief. But the child did. His eyes locked onto hers, wide and curious, maybe even a little fearful. There was something unsettling in his gaze, something that made her stop. When she was just a few feet away, the woman finally noticed her. She gasped, startled, and wiped her face with the back of her hand. She quickly stood, instinctively positioning herself in front of the boy as if to shield him. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to intrude. We were just leaving." The billionaire's face remained unreadable. She studied the woman carefully. Her uniform was from a local diner a few neighborhoods away, not one she'd ever visited. Her shoes were worn, her nails chipped, and her posture stiff with discomfort. "You knew my son?" she asked, her voice cool but curious. The waitress hesitated. Her eyes darted down toward the little boy and then back up. "Yes," she said quietly. "A long time ago. A long time ago." That phrase echoed in her mind. Her son had been dead for 5 years. She tried to place the woman's face, but it meant nothing to her. She couldn't recall ever seeing her before, not at any events, not in photographs, not in any of his memories. And yet, something about the way she stood there, something about her sadness felt too personal, too deep, to be casual. The billionaire's eyes moved to the child again. He was peeking out from behind the woman now, still holding the teddy bear. His face was soft, round, the way children's faces are. But his eyes, there was something in them. A shape, a color, something eerily familiar. "What's your name?" she asked the woman. "Marissa," she replied quickly. "Marissa Johnson." "And the boy?" Marissa looked down at him, then hesitated before speaking. "Jaden." The billionaire's brow tightened just slightly. Jaden. The name didn't ring a bell, but there was an undeniable pull in her chest as she looked at him. Marissa bent down and whispered something in Jaden's ear. He nodded but didn't say anything. He just looked up at the billionaire with wide eyes, a mix of curiosity and caution in his expression. "You have no idea how much he meant to me," Marissa said, her voice cracking. "I didn't expect to see anyone here. I just needed to come. For him." The billionaire crossed her arms. Her mind was racing now, trying to connect dots that weren't making sense. Who was this woman really? How did she know her son? Why had she never heard of her before? And why did this child look so hauntingly familiar? The silence between them grew heavier by the second. The billionaire kept her gaze fixed on Marissa, watching every flicker of emotion that crossed her face. There was something restrained about the young woman's posture, like she was holding back words she didn't know how to say. The boy clung closer to her leg now, sensing the tension in the air, his small fingers gripping the fabric of her apron tightly. "What do you mean he meant a lot to you?" the billionaire asked, her voice sharper than she intended. She was used to getting answers when she wanted them, and this cryptic sadness didn't sit well with her. Marissa looked down, eyes brimming with tears again, and took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have come. This was a mistake." She turned slightly, motioning for the boy to come with her. But the billionaire stepped forward, blocking the narrow gravel path between the graves. Her movements were calm, but her presence was commanding. "No," she said firmly. "We're not done here." The wind picked up gently, rustling the trees that lined the cemetery. A crow cawed in the distance, the only sound cutting through the tense silence. The billionaire's mind was spinning now, questions, possibilities, fears she couldn't name yet. Her son had always been private, especially during his last year. There were stretches of time when she didn't know where he was. She chalked it up to independence, adulthood, needing space from the empire he was expected to inherit. But now, standing in front of this woman and her child, she wondered if she'd overlooked something much deeper. "Tell me how you knew my son," she said again, this time slower, more deliberate. Marissa's eyes finally met hers. "I met him at the diner," she said quietly. "He used to come in late at night. I was working the closing shift. He never said who he was. Just a guy with tired eyes and a soft smile. We talked. A lot. For months." The billionaire's breath caught slightly. Her son had been a creature of habit. If he'd gone to the same diner, repeatedly, she would have known. Unless he didn't want her to. Unless he was hiding something. Marissa continued, "He didn't flaunt money. Didn't act important. I only found out who he really was after." She paused, swallowing hard. "After he was gone." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photo. The billionaire hesitated, then took it. It was a candid shot. Her son in a hoodie, seated at a booth, laughing with Marissa across the table. Her own hands trembled now as she held the image. It was unmistakably him, relaxed, happy in a way she hadn't seen him in years. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," Marissa said. "I just wanted Jaden to know, to feel close to him somehow." Jaden. The name echoed again in her mind. She looked at the boy, really looked this time. There were traces of her son's features, the curve of the jaw, the arch of the brow, the same intense gaze. The resemblance wasn't obvious, but it was undeniable now that she saw it. Her stomach tightened. She was no stranger to scandal or secrets in high society, but this wasn't business. This was personal. If this child was who she was beginning to suspect he might be, everything in her life, her legacy, her grief, her memories, was about to be rewritten. Her voice dropped, no longer sharp, but cautious. "How old is he?" Marissa hesitated. "He's 4. He just turned 4 last month." The billionaire did the math. Her eyes widened slightly. The timeline matched perfectly. The realization hit her like a wave, slow, steady, and unstoppable. The billionaire stared at the boy, this time not just with suspicion but with a dawning awareness. His features, once abstractly familiar, now began to take on sharp significance. The small indent on his chin, the slight wave in his dark hair, even the way he tilted his head when he looked up at her, it was all too similar. The little boy didn't just resemble her son. He mirrored him. She took a step back, stunned into silence. Her breathing had changed, shallow and uneven. Marissa noticed it and instinctively stepped closer to Jaden, her hand gently resting on his back. "You're saying," the billionaire started, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. Her throat felt dry. She wasn't used to not knowing. In her world, clarity was power, and power was survival. Marissa didn't speak right away. Her eyes lowered to the ground as if searching for a way to explain something too big to say aloud. Finally, she lifted her head and nodded. Not with drama or pride, just quiet confirmation. "Yes," she said. "He's your grandson." The words hung in the air like smoke, dense and impossible to ignore. The billionaire felt her knees weaken slightly. Grandson. She had a grandson. All this time. And no one had told her. How, she asked, though the question was absurd. She knew how. What she really meant was, why didn't I know? Why was I kept in the dark? Why didn't he tell me? Marissa held Jaden's hand now, gently squeezing it. He didn't want anyone to know. Not yet. He was scared. He said your world wouldn't accept someone like me. Like us. The words landed with force. Your world. The billionaire had spent her life in a world of silk gloves and iron rules, of reputation, image, and unspoken lines that were never meant to be crossed. And now, those lines had blurred completely. She remembered the day of her son's funeral. The guests, the press, the whispered condolences. But not once, did anyone mention this woman. There had been no hint of a child. No letters. No legal notice. And now, she stood here face to face with a living part of her son she never even knew existed. Marissa continued, her voice steady but low. He loved Jaden. He visited when he could, secretly. He sent money, made sure we were taken care of. But he said he was trying to fix things first, trying to figure out how to tell you, how to bring us into his life without ruining everything. The billionaire's jaw clenched. Her son had kept an entire life separate from the one he showed her. She had thought they were close. She had thought he confided in her. But the truth was, she didn't know what he had been carrying, who he had been loving, or what kind of future he had been building outside the walls of privilege and tradition. Her gaze drifted back to Jaden. He wasn't looking at her now. He was playing with the edge of his teddy bear's ear, humming softly to himself, oblivious to the storm around him. Innocent. She couldn't deny that. No matter how the truth had come to her, no matter how painful the reveal, he was innocent. Marissa reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo. It was worn, folded at the corners. She handed it over gently. It showed her son, holding baby Jaden, smiling at the camera like he didn't have a care in the world. A private moment. A father's moment. One the billionaire had never seen before. She stared at it for a long time. Her fingers brushed over the image slowly, as if trying to pull something real from it. Something she could hold on to. The photo trembled slightly in her gloved hands. It was more than just a picture. It was proof of a life she never knew existed, a bond formed in the quiet shadows of her son's final years. Her mind reeled. not just from the image itself, but from the layers of secrecy wrapped around it. How had she missed this? How had no one in her tightly controlled world noticed the signs? Or had they noticed and simply said nothing? She looked at Marissa, really looked this time, not through the lens of class, position, or status, but as a woman, a mother. There was a strength in her, not loud or defiant, but solid, rooted in something deeper than pride. It wasn't easy being a single mother. It wasn't easy raising a child in the shadow of a man who came from an untouchable world, then leaving it all behind when he died and never turning that story into scandal or spectacle. The billionaire stepped back, just slightly, trying to steady herself as memories began to surface. Moments with her son that had seemed odd at the time, a sudden change in his spending habits, late-night disappearances, cryptic comments about trying to figure things out. There had been a distance growing between them toward the end, but she'd assumed it was the usual tension of adulthood, not the weight of a secret family. Her son had grown up in a world that valued perfection, legacy, control. From a young age, he'd been trained to preserve the family name, to make decisions that protected their reputation. Love was never forbidden, but it came with unspoken conditions. He knew the kind of woman his family would accept. Marissa was not that woman, not because of her skin or her job, but because she belonged to a world they didn't understand or embrace. That reality now hung between them like an open wound. Her son had chosen love, but he'd also chosen silence. He had tried to build something meaningful in secret, likely out of fear of rejection, of scandal, of hurting the woman and child he clearly loved. And now he was gone, leaving both worlds behind to collide on the cold stone path between graves. Marissa's voice broke the silence. "He didn't want to lose you," she said. "He always said you were strong. He just didn't know if you'd be strong enough for this." The billionaire's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. There were no words. Not yet. Her world had been built on image and legacy, but this moment, raw and unscripted, felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years. Jaden had wandered a few feet away and was kneeling by another headstone, examining the small angel figurine placed at its base. He didn't know who she was. To him, she was just a stranger. But in truth, he was the closest blood she had left. Her only grandchild. The guilt started to creep in slowly. Not just because she hadn't known, but because, deep down, she understood why her son had kept this hidden. He had grown up watching his mother handle problems with precision, not compassion. She had built walls so high around herself that even her own son had been afraid to let her in. And Marissa, this woman standing quietly in front of her, had carried the weight of that decision alone. No lawyers, no media, no demands. She had simply brought her child to visit his father's grave, hoping for a moment of connection with the man who had loved them in private. It wasn't just a secret child. It was a life her son had fought to protect, a love he hadn't felt safe enough to share, a family that had existed quietly on the fringes of everything she thought she controlled. The wind had shifted again, a little colder now, as if the weight of unspoken truths had stirred the air itself. The billionaire stood motionless, the photograph still in her hand, her eyes drifting between Marissa and Jaden. For a woman who had made a career out of knowing everything, market trends, business moves, political undercurrents, she now found herself in unfamiliar territory. The ground beneath her feet didn't feel stable anymore. Nothing about this moment could be managed, negotiated, or bought. It had to be felt. She had always seen life as a structure. There were pillars: wealth, legacy, discipline, loyalty. Everything had to fit within that frame. But here stood a woman and child who didn't fit, and yet they mattered more than almost anyone else did now. Jaden wasn't part of her plans, but he was part of her blood. She didn't choose this, but that didn't mean it wasn't real. Her eyes returned to the boy. He had found a small stone and was now tracing letters on a nearby grave, humming a soft, tuneless melody as only a child could. The innocence in him was almost painful to watch. He had no idea that his very existence was shaking the foundation of an empire. No idea that one woman's pain, another woman's love, and an entire family's legacy were balancing in silence all around him. Marissa was watching her cautiously. Not fearful, but guarded. as if she'd braced herself for rejection long before she stepped into the cemetery. She had likely played this scene in her head dozens of times. The confrontation, the disbelief, the judgment. She hadn't come to ask for money or recognition. She came because her child deserved to know where he came from, who he came from. The billionaire thought about her son, how he had smiled as a boy, how fiercely he had loved even when he didn't say the words. He had always pushed against the rigid roles his family expected of him. Maybe this, Marissa, Jaden, wasn't just a secret. Maybe it was a rebellion, a choice he made for love, not legacy. She remembered one of their last conversations, when he had told her he didn't want to be just another suit in a long line of suits. At the time, she'd rolled her eyes. Now, standing here, she realized he had meant it. He had been searching for something real, something grounded, and he had found it. Still, the bitterness stung. He should have told her. He should have trusted her. And yet, a deeper voice within her whispered, would he have been wrong not to? Would she have accepted it then? Would she have embraced Marissa without hesitation? Would she have opened her arms to a child born outside her perfectly curated world? Probably not. The realization hurt more than the shock. That her son had hidden love, hidden a child, because he feared her judgment more than the world's. She was known to the public as a strong, pioneering woman. But what good was all that strength if it made her son too afraid to share the most important parts of his life? Jaden wandered back now, standing quietly beside Marissa. His eyes, those hauntingly familiar eyes, looked up at the billionaire with innocent curiosity. He didn't know what she represented. He didn't know that her approval or rejection could change the course of his life. She studied his face again. There was something unguarded about him, something her son used to have before the world taught him to shield it. There was an unspoken challenge in that look, as if asking her, what kind of woman are you really? A silence stretched between the three of them, thick but electric. Something had changed. Not just in the story, but inside her. Something had cracked, quietly but undeniably. Something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Not control, not grief. Something closer to grace.